Greetings and welcome to the Comics Coffee Metal Podcast. Today I am joined by not only a comics professional, but the comics professional. Chances are you know who this person is, and if you don't, you will. From countless books and amazing things being promoted and sent, and also doing some translating now for some books. My guest has been just in comics, hence the comics professional. And I'm so stoked to have her on the show. So, HOLLY AITCHISON, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like this has been kind of a God. How long have we known each other? Like 7 years,
What,
8 years?
has it been that long?
I mean, I've been in comics
I
since 2015.
um,
Maybe
let
it's
me
only been
see.
like 5 years.
It's I'm not sure. I know we connected through, I think, Patrick Brower from Challengers, because who else doesn't? Who doesn't connect through Patrick Brower from Challengers? Or at
It
least that's
might have
how
been
we
Patrick.
crossed paths at one point. Maybe, I
It
don't
was
know.
either Patrick or Dave Jordan.
Oh yeah, highly. Yeah, oh, was it Dave? One of those.
One of
But
those two.
but ever
Both
since
delightful
then,
human beings, but yeah, I feel like
yeah.
this has been something that we should have done a long time ago. But
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I've at least said, like, you definitely got to come on 15 times at this point. But you've been key, if not 100% responsible, for many amazing guests who've been on the show. Most recently, JP Ahonen and Balazs Lurinsky, and two fantastic gentlemen who I've probably never would have got a chance to speak to, or come across their work in any other way, shape, or form. And I'm super happy to have like awesome people like you who do that. Like, hey, you know who'd be good? And it's been just a blast. With getting heads up on some books and stuff from you, including the one you translated, which was a fantastic book. It was a really great read, and I really think people should go check it out. But we'll talk about that more.
yeah.
First and foremost, Holly, comics, coffee, metal. What are you digging right now?
So I'm going to start with metal because I had to go through a couple of. So lately, I've been listening to a lot of Chapel Roan, and I think she's
Mm-hmm.
only metal in spirit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I had to
I'd say
go.
so.
I had to go through a lot of my what have I actually been listening to recently, and go through my Spotify playlists because I listen to a lot in the background while I'm working. And I realized I've been listening to a lot of Alcest because they had that new album that came out
Okay.
a couple months ago. Very dreamy French,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, shoegazy metal, kind of great
I,
stuff.
I
Love Alcest.
yeah, I would put it as that. Yeah.
I've been listening to a lot of Turbo Wolf, who I think are
Yeah.
more like psychedelic rock, but I really
Mhm.
love them. And King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, who
Can't
are
go wrong with those. Can't go wrong with
they're all
those.
over the place. Like I feel like every album they come out with, I'm just like, well, I like it. I don't know what I'd call it, but
I you
um,
know I called it the just perfect barbecue metal.
yeah,
Like, you throw it on while you're grilling stuff, and you're just hanging out in the backyard. It's just a good time.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I also
they
promised Dave Jordan I would talk about how Miserable Things is my favorite band. Um, so I'm going to say that because otherwise Dave will be sad.
Good old Dave Jordan,
We love Dave.
pal, former guest, and great musician and awesome pedal maker,
Hmm.
and recovering comic book creator. Hopefully,
I mean,
hopefully, hopefully he'll do some more stuff.
I
Always
would
enjoyed
love
his
it if he did more.
yeah, but,
But
but
I
yeah.
actually have a Dave page on my wall. I don't think you can see it from there, but I have
Uh,
a one page that he did of a rat apocalypse because he said that if he wanted to do an apocalypse story, he didn't want to talk about people. He just wanted to talk about animals because it was more
yeah.
interesting. It was actually the first time I met Dave. So
Oh,
it was very cool.
yeah.
Um,
It's so yeah. Miserable things. Cool, cool. The You mentioned King Gizzard, and there's a band I talk about sometimes on here called Orange Goblin,
mm,
and I don't know if you're familiar with them.
I don't think so. I'm going to be taking notes whenever you mention something where I'm
Um,
like, oh,
I,
I gotta check
you
it out.
know, they are like I I've described them before as like, what if the sword worshipped Motorhead instead of Black Sabbath?
Ooh,
Um, and as I've delved more into both of those bands' catalogs, it's not a one to one kind of comparison or the most apt analogy, but I still think it holds up pretty good. It's just he's got the gravelly voice Lemmy kind of thing
yeah,
going, but they got the good grooves. They got the kind of spaciness sometimes of some good fuzzy stoner rock kind of stuff. So
nice.
stuff that definitely is in that vein of King Gizzard.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think you dig them.
I'll have to check them out. Yeah, I think you know what actually how I think we met? I do think it was through Dave, but I think it was because I was looking for band recommendations
Oh,
and
okay.
you recommended some crazy like Euro pop metal band that I'm
Was it
blanking
was
on
it
the
Electric Callboy?
yes, it was Electric Cowboy.
Probably. I mean, I mean, whenever I like get into a band, like it easily becomes the thing I recommend to everybody.
hmm
Everybody love this too. And since you said French and metal, I have to bring up the Gojira performance at the Olympics for
That
no
was so
reason, just to bring it
cool.
up because I love Gojira and that was amazing, and um, I love them.
I was so excited about that because I had so many friends who are not metal fans who watched
Yeah,
it and who were just like, "Oh man, who is this?" And I was like, "Let me tell you about Gojira. Let's talk about it.
sit down. Let's talk
Um,
about these good old
let's
boys.
talk about it."
Are they
They're
satanic? No, but they are very big on climate change and helping the environment. So to some people, they might as well be satanic. So
yeah, yeah. They're actually in a couple weeks. They're playing here with weird
corn and
lineup. It's
spirit
like
box.
it's yeah, Corn Spirit Box and Evanescence is playing here too.
Oh, and Evanescence was a
Yeah,
ticket.
yeah. So I might have to buy tickets. They're like $112. I'm like,
We we have tickets to see Corn, Spirit Box, and Gojira up here in Chicago when they come in September. And I wish Evanescence was playing with them. That would be awesome too. But I you know, I keep telling my wife like I'm good to go after Gojira. Like we both like Corn enough.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but like I'm like if you're done after Gojira, I'm done too. That's cool. Like
yeah.
if you get to see them with Evanescence, like I wonder if they're gonna do any of that. When the Corn had that unplugged album,
Oh yeah, that
I
would be
think
really
that's.
cool.
I think I like plenty of Corn stuff. Um, but I think that unplugged album was like the one me and my wife were both like, yeah, this is our favorite one. And and Amy Lee being on the Freak on the Leash track with that, like I'm like, oh, that'd be cool to see live if they did that.
Yeah, yeah. I
Um,
hadn't thought about that, but that's a good point. Yeah,
yeah,
I a couple of years ago I saw Every Time I Die, Mastodon, and Coheed and Cambria, and I
mm,
went specifically just to see Every Time I Die.
yeah,
And then I was like, I'm gonna leave. I've seen Mastodon like 6 or 7 times. I love them, but they were playing like just one album start to finish, and so I was like,
yeah,
maybe I'll head out. And then I got so enthralled in watching Mastodon that I was like, I might as well stay for the whole thing,
yeah.
just
Did
see
you?
Coheed again, and
Yeah,
that was really fun. Yeah, I don't
I've
see as
never.
much live stuff here because tickets in LA are always so expensive, and I
Hmm.
was really spoiled by Chicago's like the music scene. I feel like I never paid more than like the most expensive show I saw was like $100 for a ticket, and here it's like, oh no, that's
Yeah.
where we're starting.
Well, I won't name the price because I'm sure anyone can easily find it. But this was easily the most expensive show we've ever gone to. Granted, we haven't gone to a show in like 9 years
mm.
before kids. And I think the last show we saw was Nightwish
Oh, that would be
with
cool.
Sabatone and Delane opening, and that was in Chicago in this little 1,500 seater club thing. And Nightwish played it like it was a festival gig. Like I'm sure if they could have had fire, they would have. uh, and all that stuff. But yeah, it's been a while. I forgot that you're in LA, because like, yeah, that whole the corn lineup and all that. That was like the one off they announced,
Yeah.
and I saw that, and I told my wife, like, if they tour with this, we're going.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, they're touring with most of it, But
Yeah.
there's another band I want to see that's actually coming to town in a week or two. It's at a smaller club called Orbit Culture, but like I don't know anyone to go with because it's
Mm.
definitely not my wife's kind of metal, and definitely not a band. She's like, yeah, I'm gonna go on a weekday night and go see this band in Chicago. Like,
Yeah, I feel like
but
that's it was a lot easier when back in Chicago I had a couple people that I would go to shows with, and I had enough friends that were just the kind of people who, if you were like, I bought you a ticket, you should come with me, they'd be like,
yeah,
well, if you bought me a ticket. Whereas
yeah.
here it's like folks are like, I got to go all the way out to the west side. No,
No, thanks, pass.
more of a journey, you know?
Yeah. You know, I want to keep going into the
Yeah.
comics and coffee
Yes.
portion of the chat, but I don't ask people this very often. But like, you've mentioned some stuff with metal, and uh, like, what was like your first like metal band that you're like, yeah, I guess I like metal now.
Oh man. Okay, so I have kind of a different path to a lot of music because my mom and my uncle are both huge into music, like just in
Hmm.
general. My mom was really raised me in like in punk music, like
Okay.
deep in like she had like 3 foot Liberty spikes when I was a baby, so like I was a little spoiled as a kid when it came to music. And my uncle, who is he both my mom and my uncle are tattoo artists now, but my uncle, when I was really little, used to do art for like independent metal bands and like smaller metal
Oh,
bands.
okay.
So he was constantly listening to like to just anything loud. And because my mom was so young when I was born, she basically was still living at home until I was about 3. And so I would hear whatever my uncle was playing. So probably
Yeah.
the first band that I really liked as a kid was Iron Maiden. And like the older I get, I don't listen to as much Iron Maiden at this point, but they do still have like a really I have a soft spot for them.
Hmm.
Um,
I
yeah,
think somewhere
I
Dave Jordan's heart just grew 3 times larger, unbeknownst to him.
Yeah, he's probably very happy. Yeah, so I grew up with a lot of like thrash metal, and so it's weird because now I think I do listen to a lot more of like folk metal and a lot more of the kind of melodic instrumental black metal as compared to like when I was younger. Um,
Yeah.
though I still return to thrash a lot. I really like this band Planes Mistaken for Stars, which I think are more like I don't even know what I would call them. They're like screamy emo, but not screamo. There's a difference there.
If you have your feet planted in some black metal type stuff, the cartoonist Chuck Beebe,
Hmm.
he does, his, okay, I'm not sure if you've checked out any of his stuff, his
I have
music.
black metal.
Okay.
I was at Oni for about 2 years. It was after that book came out, but our head of operations, really cool guy named Brad Rooks, who runs like an indie t-shirt company called DSDW. He introduced me to Chuck's work because he was like, "Oh, well, you like all the," because I was like, "I love Agretzko, I love like metal, I
Yeah.
love comics." So, and I was really psyched about all the Agretzko stuff. And he was like, "You want to read some metal comics? I'm going to give you a real metal comic." And he was very much like, "You're really going to like this." And I did. I still like,
Yeah.
I don't keep every book that I get comps of, like, despite what it looks like. And I have so many more books over there. I actually do like pare down my comics periodically, but black metal has survived every call for the past like 7 years. It's like 6 or 7 years. So
Yeah. What was it? I had the first volume of black metal for a while. And then I think it was during all the shutdowns and stuff. I finally like sat down and read it. And then I'm like, okay, I need the rest of this. And then I just got that big honking tome, which is down here somewhere.
yeah,
And then, I got to have Chuck on the show, and he had his band, his music project Noska the Void. That was really cool. And now he has Edger, which is another really cool black metal thing. And it's just like, you know, it's crazy just like how like, and it just, I mentioned a lot, I know, on the show, but just the crossover was just between musicians and metal and comic people. And it's just like, it's so much. Like, I don't know. Can't, like, we all love different genres of music, of course. Like you mentioned, Chappelle Roan, and I've certainly mentioned my fair share of like non-metal acts I like. And but like, I don't think there's as much people who love and make other kinds of music that also make comics.
yeah.
And I feel like if you dig down, there's probably some sort of correlation with everything about it, but I'm too lazy to do that. So I'm just gonna mention that there feels like there's one.
It feels like something somebody could write like a thesis paper about, like the link
Yeah.
between comics and metal.
And
Um, Maybe
but yeah,
like the
yeah.
storytelling is really rich in metal. Like,
Yeah.
you think about something like even like Opeth albums, which I mean,
Hmm.
less so lately, but like especially earlier Opeth have these very like strong through lines that make for like these really dynamic and rich stories. So maybe it's that a little bit.
Hmm.
I don't know.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and that's why you're the comics professional, because you just put that together right now. I mean, well, I'm
They
like,
won't
I don't
pay
know
me
which
to
one
talk about
kind,
this
which
stuff. They
something,
make me do other things. It's one
but
day.
yeah, it always just tickles me whenever there's like someone else I've not come across before as a creator who also like just plays, even if they just play music, or someone mentions the guitar. It's like a bat signal in the sky for me. And I'm like, who said guitar? Who what you got?
Yeah,
um
it is
but
it's
yeah.
funny. Like um I think I've told you this, but like I played bass for a really long time, and I quit basically like um, when I went to college was when I quit because I was like I have to focus on like
Hmm.
school and stuff, which didn't really work out because I wasn't there for very long. Wish I'd kept my bass instead. But yeah, I feel like there's I don't know, maybe it's partially just like having that creative flow, and like when you're making music and playing music, it's just like there's a certain part of you that's like, well, I'm crafting something beautiful and making something cool, and then it just becomes what else can I make. um,
Yeah.
I don't know. That might also just be me like romanticizing writing music and creation,
Well,
and you know,
well, there's also like the tactile aspect of it, and I think with metal, it's easier to like have metal like encompass more emotions when you're
yeah,
creating something. That, not that pop music can't be angry or sad or whatever, but like with metal, it's just much more common for, at least especially these days, for a band to just be able to do all of that kind of stuff in their albums and all that. So like, what is that not if exactly comics, just doing
yeah,
whatever you want to do to 11.
yeah. And I think you're right. I think there's um, with metal, there's a certain amount of like you can tell any story with metal in an
Hmm.
effective way. And there's a lot of that, like finding beauty in horrifying things and in anger. And I don't know, I can get really poetic about this stuff. Obviously, like I make art with skulls and stuff. So for me, it's a lot of that same like respecting aspects of something that could be scary, or that causes you to think about like about things in a different way. um,
Hmm.
and I think that's something that metal does that can really lead to some interesting places
Yeah,
creatively.
yeah, and to replay my broken record one more time, it's just that you could ask anybody what their favorite metal band is, and you'll get wildly different answers. Like I could recommend Electric Callboy, which is basically Euro pop metal.
Yeah,
And but then I'm also would recommend a band like Azure, just like straight up black metal, or all the stuff in between. And it's just like what you need, we got
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Whatever
There's
it is.
something for everybody. It's
Exactly.
I get
um
very fussy when I meet people who are like, "Oh, I don't like metal because I don't like screaming," and I'm like, "Oh, buddy, there's so much more."
that's less than 50% of metal, buddy.
Yeah, it's. I mean,
So
you mentioned Nightwish, like Nightwish and
yeah,
bands like that, where it's like, no, this is opera, like it.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
what it is. That's the level of
yeah,
training you have to sing this way,
yeah.
and yeah,
And even when Marco was in the band and he would be doing his growly stuff, it was just more of a snarl or a growl. It was never like intelligible, and it was in key, so he
hmm,
was singing.
yeah, exactly.
All right.
I went down a bit
uh
of a rabbit hole there, but yeah,
this you've seen the podcast before. This is all rabbit hole.
that's true. I mean, that is one of the reasons I'm excited to be here is because I love a good rabbit hole. I had
Let everyone else ask the easy questions. Oh, why do you like this? What got you into this? Like, no, let's go down the rabbit holes.
yeah,
Not that those
yeah.
questions aren't cool to answer or ask, because I do ask them sometimes, but the
It's
fun
good
is
to mix it up,
in the things that just come up.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
um,
comics
so
I've been reading.
yeah,
I actually have reference because I brought a pile. So I've been really deep into a bunch of manga lately.
okay,
Partially because back like now that I'm back on working in a publisher that does weeklies, and we do a lot of license stuff, and we kind of run the gamut there. Um, I've been looking for the kinds of stories that we don't necessarily get out of mainstream Western comics lately.
mhm,
Like, I've also been reading a lot of trashy romance novels. So, so I was like, well, I want to read something that has a really deep and involved like I wanted something that has a bunch of volumes, but that doesn't require me to think too hard. Uh, so it's been a lot of manga for me. I recently finished. I read book two of this too, but Smoking Behind the Supermarket. Yeah, Smoking Behind the Supermarket with You, which
mhm.
is from Square Enix manga. It's really really good. My wonderful friend Morgan Perry recommended it, and she is correct. It's really fun. It's slice of life about a salary man who is having a rough time at work, and he befriends a woman at the convenience store, and they just smoke behind the convenience store and talk about life. And it's very like slow paced. It's just human interaction, and it's just really fun and sweet. And as soon as I finished the first book, I had to buy the second one, and Morgan yelled at me because I should have just asked her for it because she works there now. Um, I've also been reading. Oh, I do have a copy of this. I might have to send you this for your daughter. Godzilla Monster Island Summer Camp, which
I
is
I've been eyeing that up to get. Period. So yes, please do
well. I can,
if you can.
if you want to wait until the end of the month, I can send you a signed copy because I'll be seeing Rosie and Nick on the 25th, or I can just send you one. But um,
I'm happy to wait.
it's so good. It's so sweet and funny, and I don't know. I'm so excited that we have kids books for like Godzilla books that are for kids
Yeah,
because
yeah.
kids love Godzilla. Kids love giant monsters. Ultraman Rising was so good. and there's not a lot of that monster content that is kid
Mhm.
appropriate. And
Yeah.
you know, so I'm really excited about that. Um, yeah, I'm excited about Sir issue one, which dropped today.
Mhm.
I have to pick that up
It's really good.
from friend
From
of the
Philhouse.
show, Fellhound.
Yes.
So I'm really excited about that. Yeah, I've been so deep in the manga lately. So the terrible thing for me is I will ask people for recommendations and I will fully pick them up. And then I won't read them for 6 months because I'm like, either I have to read something for work or I have brainless, either trashy romance or just fun manga that I need to read to
Yeah.
clear my head. So that's kind of been what I've been reading. What about you, friend? Because I might steal some recs from you because I mean I know
Well,
you're also
I, I,
buried in.
yes. Before we start recording, I kind of mentioned that I'm on the cusp of like just getting people to just sit down at night and just read stuff again. So right now my stuff is all stuff like I'm trying to get ready for the show.
Yeah.
Like Sir, which was great. Excited to pick that up. I need to finish The Cabinet from Image Comics.
Oh
Uh,
yeah,
that was
that was
from David Ebeltoft and Jordan Hart, and I want to say Shiara. I forget the. I don't want to mispronounce the artist's name, but it's fantastic art. But I had I read the first 3 issues, and it's just fantastic. And I just haven't gotten to sit down to read the rest of them. Um, what else was I was trying to get to read? There's a bunch of Kickstarters I have to catch
so
up
many
on.
Kickstarters, like so many good
Um,
projects happening.
there's was it the one from Marco Stack? Uh, oh,
Love
why am
Mark.
I spacing on the name of it? I'm sorry, Mark. Yeah, yeah. This is just, it's my folders in my computer are just filthy with PDFs from Kickstarters. Where I'm like, I was so excited to like, oh, this is gonna be great. There it goes. See you later.
Hmm.
Like, so I'm looking forward to all that. And then yeah, just catching up on a bunch of the books I got in the back here that I have not gotten to, like Paper Girls, and uh, finally finishing Invincible. And I have quite a few Godzilla IDW collections now, which I've read some of them, but there's like the Godzilla Rivals ones I haven't gotten to read yet, but I got the 2 collected editions of that. So I'm excited to do that, and uh, especially
Did I
start
send you Here
finding
There Be
myself in Godzilla
Dragons?
comics.
Oh,
What's that?
sorry. Did I send you Here There Be Dragons? Have you read that one?
No, I have not.
It's Godzilla versus pirates.
I'm familiar with the book because my buddy Ben Dewey did some covers for it, which
Oh,
looked fantastic,
yeah.
and I was just like, that's an amazing concept. He even got Anguirus in one of the covers, which is my favorite. Um, but yeah, I need to like delve deep into some Godzilla comics, and start working on my Godzilla, because I want to start checking off things on my bucket list, and doing something officially for Godzilla comics is on that list somewhere. So if I
Well,
can
I
swing
mean,
something somewhere, I need to start
I
working on
know
it
who
now.
we can talk to about that.
So yeah, that's the kind of stuff I'm thinking. But yeah, Sir was great. Looking forward to issue 2. The Cabinet is something I'm actively like trying to get. And I once again read the book that we're going to talk about that you worked on, Hanami from Humanoids, and we'll get to that in a second. Though
Yeah.
we have one more question for the show
Okay.
to answer, and that is coffee.
Yes. So I have been drinking this blend from a company called Drink Coffee Do Stuff, which is just a great name for a coffee company.
Sounds like my kind of place.
Yeah, I have a trade subscription because I don't like buying coffee at the grocery store,
Hmm.
and I am both super not picky in that I will drink a like I love IHOP coffee. It's like
Yeah.
it was the first coffee that I decided, oh, I actually really like this. Because, there's that point as a kid where you're like, this is gross, this is gross, this is gross. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, maybe I do like this. So I like absolute garbage coffee. And then I like nice, fancy coffee and nothing in between. Um, so I like trade because it allows me to pick stuff based on my tastes, which has been great. I also it lets me pick out like there's a roastery in Texas I really like. Um, I think it's called Seeker, but it's a woman owned roastery, and all of their bags have like really cool art on them, and
Yeah.
so I can do things like I can just pick. It's like wine shopping. If I like the bag design, I'm much more likely to drink it. um, like they have a blend called Space Cowboy that I really like. Obviously, I bought it for the name. I
Yeah.
didn't know what the notes were. It was like nectarine and fudge, and I was like, it's going to taste like coffee to me, friend. I just like this bag.
You know, the I- the coffee notes thing is like it. I've tried lots of different coffees at this point, and I want to say maybe 15% of them actually. I'm like, okay, I see this. I can taste that. Maybe it's the way I make it or whatever. Or maybe it's my particular palate. But I'm like, it's good, but I don't know. I don't know what where the
Yeah,
apricot comes into play here. Like,
yeah.
but
It's
do you have a specific like like kind of roast, like a dark roast, medium roast?
so.
Uh,
When I first started getting trade, it was back when I worked at Humanoids, and I convinced them to get a subscription for the office because I was like,
mhm,
we drink a lot of coffee here. I
yeah.
would rather we get some good coffee than just go to Trader Joe's every week. And my boss there was very open to it and was like, yeah, that's, I think the French are very open to funny things. Like, they're just like, oh, yes, if fancy coffee, yes, we will spend $100 a quarter on this. And it's like, yes. Um,
They get it.
so
They understand.
I was when I started with that, I thought I really liked light roasts because I was like, that's the most caffeine and that's all I care about.
Hmm.
And then the longer that we were doing it, and the more that I realized, like, I actually don't know that I like light roasts. I think they work well for me. I think they wake me up, and I get the function
Yeah.
out of it. I think I tend to like more of like a medium to dark roast.
Hmm.
Um, but I also, again, it's like with the notes, sometimes a blend will surprise me. Like it'll sound like something that I have no interest in. It'll be like a medium that is from like a grocery store that a friend bought, and I'll get it home and try it and be like, oh, this is actually incredibly good. I don't know. Maybe I have no palate for coffee truly. I just love it.
You know, despite it being in the name of the show and me talking about it a lot, like I don't suppose myself as some sort of like coffee like expert at all. I try to do what I can because I have no idea if my palate is like correct at all with anything. Because I definitely like a dark roast. We do a medium roast because that's the one we can agree on all day.
Yeah.
Um, my wife tends to like the more citrusy kind of roasts. I couldn't stand those, but I'm starting to warm up to them now. It really depends. And then, but she doesn't do sugar and does like just like the smallest amount of any creamer or milk in hers.
Mhm.
And I'm like, still a baby with my sugar and my half and half and in there. But so granted, it's different experiences or whatever. But um, yeah, it's crazy just how much good coffee is there out there. Just you know, there's a few roasters that if you are looking to change, looking for something or whatever that around here that I really like, and that's Rusty Dog Coffee
I don't know if I've
and
ever had
Snowdrift
Rusty Dog.
Coffee.
What was the other one?
Snowdrift,
Oh, I don't think
that's
I've
an
had
Illinois
either.
roaster. Rusty Dog is a Wisconsin roaster.
Mm.
They're both really good. my wife and I were sad because last year they had a special Pride roast during Pride
Mm,
Month, which was amazing, and we were like all jazzed up for it this year. And then it didn't come out, and then they said like, "Yeah, we're not doing that." We kind of felt bad profiting off of that, and like we couldn't like
mm.
basically very reasonable reason why they wouldn't have it again. But it's also like, can you just do it again though? Like, just
Yeah.
make the
Well, I
roast,
also
please.
am always like, I get when people feel that way about like, I don't want to profit off of something that
Yeah,
is, a civil rights or a social, a social justice type movement. But it's like, okay, cool. So just give a portion of profits
and
to causes.
they did, and they are an LGBTQ owned
Mm,
company and all that,
yeah,
and so they had quote unquote skin in the game. You know,
yeah,
they did they did it the right way, and but
yeah.
if they felt like it wasn't, they didn't, if they didn't feel great doing it, then it's like, okay,
Mm.
fine. But that was a
See,
really good
that's one of
roast,
those things where
everyone.
I'm
Can you
like,
just bring it back
yeah,
as something else then?
yeah, just
Lie
call
to
it
us a little
something
bit.
different.
But
Or also, it's
they
like if you're
yeah,
if you're queer in the first place and you're the person
yeah,
that's doing it, it's like, well, everything that I'm doing for like if I'm buying something from your company, it's benefiting a queer person. So like
yeah,
you might as well make it like play on the rainbow capitalism once a year.
yeah.
Target
Like,
does it.
yeah,
I'd rather
if
give
Target and
independent
Walmart
roasteries my
are gonna
money.
dip their
Yeah.
toes in, like, I'd rather give that to money to you.
Yeah.
um, but no, they have some really good roasts. They are lighter medium roasts that I would recommend, like the penny candy roast
Mm.
from Snowdrift, and I forget the one from Rusty Dog, but I'll have to let you know what that is, because I'm
Yeah.
due to order up some more pretty soon from them. But I might check out this the one you just recommended, the drink coffee do stuff.
Drink coffee, do stuff. Oh, it's. I think the other one is called Sightseer. That's what it is,
Okay.
not Seeker. It's Sightseer, and they have a roast called Dad Bod, which is I fully bought it for the name because I was just like, obviously, I need a coffee named Dad Bod, and it's a very like medium roast that everybody can enjoy. That was one that I got a lot when I was at Humanoids. That and there was one that was called like Drinky Crow that I really liked from a different
Okay.
roastery. Um, I
Okay.
love buying coffee
I
for
want
the
to check. I
name.
want to check out the Dad Bod one then, for sure. Like,
It's so
how could I
good.
not? How could I not with a name like that? Like, you got to check it out.
Who can say no
Um,
to a dad bod? You know?
there you go. Awesome, awesome. Well, I think now's the time we can set aside the questions of the show, and talk about the amazing book you did the translation for, uh, and that is Hanami from Humanoids. It was, let me pull up the correct credits here. It was written and drawn by Julia Cejas,
Mm-hmm.
and you know it's an amazing book. I'm sure you could probably describe it better than I can, in terms of
Yeah, I wrote all the copy for it.
yeah,
It's a
and
weird experience.
I'm glad to talk about this book because with translating, there's like a lot of different, like, I find I have a bunch of different questions about like the process of that and all that. But first and foremost, Holly, if you could let everyone know, what is Hanami?
So, Hanami it's Julia's story. She and her husband, well, now husband, at the beginning of the book, they were not married. His name's Mark. It was a couple of years ago. I think it was 2019 when they actually did this because it was pre-pandemic. Um, they they're from Spain, and Spain was in the middle of an economic downturn. And Julia is an artist. Her husband at the time was an engineer, and he was laid off. And they realized that they had money saved up. He had gotten a good chunk for severance. She had gotten an independent contract that had paid pretty well. And they decided this is the best time for us to just move to Japan for 6 months. So they moved to Japan for as long as the money would hold out. And they decided to just experience the culture. And it allowed them to really pursue their dreams a little bit more in some ways. Julia has been a successful illustrator for several years. I think she's been, I want to say, since like 2010 maybe was when she started. I don't remember, but um, so she's been pretty successful in that field. And Mark, her husband, is a composer now. He wanted to compose for video games, and he had gone into engineering because it was a successful career path where he could make a lot of money. But he realized he didn't love it. So while they were in Japan, he actually, not to spoil an aspect of the book, but he cold applied for a job at Kojima's company. Just basically went to their offices with his demo on a USB and went in and said, "Hey, could you give this to Kojima-san?" And the woman at the reception desk was like, "We don't really take cold drop offs, but it's Japan, so the culture is very polite and very like, do you have an appointment? Like, how can I help you?" And he explained that he was here for a couple months and he really looks up to Kojima and he wanted to learn more about becoming a composer in the game industry. And the composer that happened to do all the music for, I believe, Metal Gear, happened to be there that day. So Mark got to talk to him and learn more about becoming a composer. And it's all stuff that really happened to the two of them living in Japan. And it's this mix of really kind of surreal moments, like the things that you would expect from somebody just abruptly moving to Japan without a full like cultural context. There's some really funny stories about the ways that manners are different in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Like in Japan, you don't like if you have a runny nose on the train or in public in Japan, you don't blow your nose. It's considered very rude. So people will just continue to snort, and that's considered more polite than blowing your nose, which Julia did not know at the time. And so she was having this absolute moment of just like, what is happening when they were on the train and just being like, what's going on here? I don't understand. And then she learned about it. And it's a really funny bit in the book where she says that at that moment, she could imagine a Japanese woman visiting Spain and feeling equally uncomfortable with the people on trains there blowing their nose. Um, it's just such a fun book, and I'm so happy I got to work on it. It was when I was at Humanoids. It was a book that was released in France, and the team at Humanoids. So Humanoids owns another company in France called La Boîte à Boule, which is like more of like slice of life nonfiction stuff. And it doesn't really sync up with a lot of what Humanoids releases in the States, because what they're really known for in the States is like the Incal and a lot of that like
Yeah.
Jodo books and, very like high sci-fi.
Prestige, high,
Yeah.
yeah, high concept
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
And very French stuff. Like there's that very French style. Um, and Hanami was something that was very successful for La Boîte à Boule, was selling really well, and they weren't sure if it would do well in the States. And it came across my desk, and I was really advocating for it because of the content and because there's so many really fantastic nods to like different manga artists. Like there's so many cool moments. And from like a personal standpoint, I have been a student of Japanese since I was in middle school. Shout out to Sailor Moon. Like I've been studying it for a long time, and I went to Japan in 2020, right before the pandemic hit, and I loved it. And this book just felt like something that I wanted for me. And the leadership at Humanoids was not unsupportive, but they were kind of like, well, this doesn't feel like something that is our kind of book. Like, we don't know if it would do well. And we want to have confidence in your belief in it, but it's really outside of what we normally do.
Yeah.
And so I decided to translate it for free.
Oh.
Because I was like, well, if I've translated it for you, it's done. You just got to letter
Yeah.
it now. it's done.
Yeah.
And it worked. um,
Nice. Nice.
yeah.
I mean, that's putting yourself out there with that, and just like showing like how much support. And I don't know if if Julia is aware of like what you did with
Oh,
all
yeah.
that.
No, Julia. Oh, man, she's great. So funny thing is, so I translated it from Spanish.
Hmm.
Um, and getting it in Spanish in the first place involved emailing Julia, who we knew spoke English, or at least we thought she spoke English. She speaks English okay, and her husband speaks fluent English. So she was checking everything with her husband, but when we would be emailing, and um, so I'd emailed her to ask, "Hey, do you have this in Spanish?" Weird question, but since you're Spanish, I'm guessing you wrote it in Spanish first. And
Yeah.
she said, yeah, I actually have never read the French translation. I can't read French. And I was like, that makes two of us. Uh, so she sent me the PDF in Spanish, and I translated it from Spanish. And the fun thing for me was like her. So she says her English isn't great. I think her English is just fine. And I told her that on several occasions. And a couple months into us chatting, she was like, I have to confess, I sometimes have to check with Mark to make sure I'm saying things correctly. And I was like, Julia, I got to be honest with you. Sometimes I have to double check with Google Translate to make sure I'm using the right context. Like, we're fine. um, but yeah, she and we actually became pretty good pals. I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to say like we're friends, but she did say if I'm ever in Spain, I have somewhere I can stay. So,
That's
which was
awesome.
really sweet of her.
Yeah.
So she's been great. She was very supportive when I said that this was something that I was really passionate about. And she knew that I wasn't actually in charge of making the call over whether it could happen. I basically was just like, from my perspective, this is a book that I think could do really well in the States, both in terms of like, I think there's an audience for it. I think there's a good chunk of people who are like manga fans or who are
Hmm.
curious about Japanese culture or just, like slice of life. And also, so from that business perspective, I think there's an audience, but also just it's the kind of book that when I was learning more about Japanese culture and about visiting the country, it's the kind of thing I wish I'd had at the time.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's been working with her was fantastic. And
Yeah, that was going to be one of my main questions, is like, how involved was the author with the translation? It sounds like it was very much a all all in with that, which is great, because the especially translating from Spanish to English, like the so much context of phrasing
yeah,
and things are very difficult. And
yeah,
I am certainly not a Spanish speaker. I'm half Mexican. My dad never wanted to teach us it because he's like, "You're America now. We're in America." I'm like,
yeah,
kind of
that's
now. I was born in America, but like, so
yeah.
you speak English. And like, not the best call, Dad. So like
No, but
my
I
intent
get
to
that.
learn
It's
as
I
an adult. Yeah, yeah.
the only reason I speak Spanish as well as I do is my best friend growing up is she was from Guatemala, and
Hmm.
so her mom her mom would yell at her in Spanish for years until I was like 9 or 10. They would fight in Spanish, and we would watch, like, I used to go camping with them, and we would watch like
Hmm.
Sábado Gigante, and I didn't understand any of it until all of a sudden I did. And I was like, oh, this is great. But yeah, there's definitely that. I think with a lot of, and obviously, like I don't have personal me experience with this, but a lot of my friends in Chicago, it's a city with a lot of kids of immigrants, and especially with like kind of Latin American culture in the U.S. There's a lot of that, like there is that, like, we're in the US now, we speak English, like,
Yeah.
and there's, so I get how parents end up in that headspace of like, I want you to be accepted, and it's like
Yeah.
now I think it's very different, but
I mean, it- seeing now, one, being a parent myself, and two,
yeah,
just more understanding like my dad's, even like his schedule, because he worked like third shift. So it's like, yeah, that's how he wants to spend his weekends when he actually sees his children.
yeah,
Because usually he was asleep when we uh were up for school, and then he left by the time we were back from school or whatever. So yeah, we would only really see him on the weekends, and then so like I'm sure like that's what he wanted to do with his time
yeah,
is teach
yeah,
us Spanish, and not like
yeah,
coach our little league or something instead.
yeah, yeah,
So I don't blame him for real. Like I
yeah,
get it,
yeah,
but it's also like, yeah, trying to learn it later as an adult has been kind of tough. My wife definitely understands it pretty well, and I think she can read it pretty well. Speaking, it's a different thing, but it is always one of those things I try to circle back to. But yeah, the context of getting
yeah,
things and moving them along. Like I wouldn't know reading this. I knew you had translated it because that's that's the uh you're upfront with that when you sent it to me, which was fine. But
mhm,
it's like I wouldn't have known that this was like in a different language. Like it reads perfectly fine, like perfectly good in English. Um, like the jokes land great.
that makes
You
me so
know,
happy.
I've been scrolling through. I'm not
Yeah,
while you're
yeah,
talking about it, just like finding all the bits and all that, and uh, you know, and you were right to like champion this book because I really think it's a fantastic book. It does kind of read like half guidebook and half fun vignettes
yeah,
of just culture shock and all that, and like the bidet scene,
yes,
like
I
it's
love that so much.
and just like the or like the minutia of trash,
Yes,
or and all that kind of stuff, and it's just and when I say like half guidebook, that's not a knock on it. Like it's like you're engrossed in like this. Like I wish this is how we other cultures were explained to everybody.
yeah,
you know like
yeah,
I
that
think we would
was,
all be like, oh, okay, like we would get it a bit more because you know uh, Julia's cartooning is fantastic, and just like even like the subtle shift in styles with panels just to like emphasize certain moments and all that are really fantastic. And I always am drawn to when someone like chooses like a limited color palette to
yeah,
express everything because um as someone who would love to do that himself one day with stuff, it feels like you're stripping away like any like semblance of like I can save it in the colors, I can make it
yeah,
look better. It's like, no, it's gonna look good, it's gonna be okay. um
yeah, yeah, Julia. So when I was translating it, it was very important to me that I keep her voice, because that was
mhm,
something that I really loved about it, because she is so funny and she has this very dry sense of humor. And I think it helped that our senses of humor are very similar. So it was easy for me to be like, I understand, like, she used some Spanish slang, and I learned Spanish in a very, like, I learned it in Chicago. So most of the Spanish I learned was like, Central American. It's
yeah,
very different from Spain. So there were some expressions that I was like, I don't even know what this means, but I get the implication of what she's saying.
mm-hmm.
And there were a few times where I had to email her and just be like, I think I know what this says, but it looks like this is an expression or like a colloquialism. Um, and she was really, really helpful with saying, like, oh, well, this was the feeling that I was trying to get there, so that I could look at it and say, okay, I know what you're literally saying, but like, as a literal translation, it would read as like kind of dry, rather than
Hmm.
it being like something that has a little bit more spirit. And I know that that's not a situation a lot of translators find themselves in, where they can have that conversation of like, what were you feeling here?
Yeah.
And so that was, I was very lucky with that, because she was so open to hearing like, this is what I'm seeing here. Like there's a bit at the beginning where she and Mark were talking about whether they should get married before they moved to Japan, because it would be easier to get a visa as a married couple than as
Hmm.
a couple in a relationship. And he's he basically says like, well, we could just get married and make it easier. And what she literally said was something that basically was like, that's a laugh or something like that. And
Hmm.
what when I asked her about it, because I was like, is this meant to be like, because I'd initially translated it as like, get real. And
Hmm.
she was like, no, in that moment, I meant it. Like, it was more like, it's funny to me because, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Um, so I think I just translated it as, that makes sense to me. And it was just really, it was an interesting experience. I love language, and I love how like transliteration is so interesting to me, because it can make or break a book when it comes
Yeah.
to something like, like when you can tell when somebody translated it and didn't try to make it feel like it's honoring the story. Like you can tell when a translator is just like, I have done a literal translation. And sometimes I
Yeah.
think that happens because there's an assumption that editorial will come in and like
Hmm.
tidy it up and make it sound more fluid, which doesn't always happen depending on the editor.
Yeah.
They might think, well, the translator translated it. I don't know how to translate it, so this must be correct. Like, why would I change it?
Yeah.
Um, and it was very important to me that what I was doing was both an accurate translation and one that translated not only the actual just direct words, but the feelings that Julia was trying to, convey in this story. Because it's a super personal story for her. It was,
Yeah.
there's some really intense moments in it. Like she and Mark had a whole conversation about like, what are we even doing? Like,
Hmm.
what is the point of being here? Like, are we escaping our life? Are we? And it's like, so it was super important to me that I do it right,
Hmm.
so that she felt like, and that was something that I emailed her a few times throughout the process, not not too often unless I had something that I got snagged on, but especially when I got near the end, I sent her a translation and I was just like, I just want to make sure you feel like this is honoring what you were saying. Um,
Yeah.
which I've worked at a couple publishers now that do translations, and there's varying degrees of creator involvement there, like in their
Hmm.
native language. Um, because sometimes, if it's somebody in France who the rights were sold by the French company for English translation, maybe the creator's not involved at all because they don't
Yeah.
necessarily have that level of communication. Um, I think because I was sort of in a position where I was like, well, there's no editor yet. There's just me.
It's
Uh,
it's just born out of love and passion for the book,
mhm.
and it's clearly evident that this book is a shining example of like your pure appreciation and love of the medium of comics. And anyone who's known you for any amount of time just knows how much you just love comics as a medium, how much of a champion you are for it. And we talked a bit about earlier with the metal thing, like creation and stuff like that, like, and someone asked the obvious question here, of
Mhm.
course, is that have you thought about writing, or you mentioned you make art with skulls, like drawing anything comic wise, even if it's just for yourself as an exercise or anything like that. And if you have before and I'm unaware of it, I'm terribly sorry, but
No, that's
I
okay. Yeah, so I have been in two anthologies. but they were both things where somebody invited me.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Corpus, which was Nadia Shamas's anthology that was about basically about medical care,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the first anthology I contributed to. I was very, very lucky because my dear friend Morgan Perry, who went to school for sequential art, but does not draw, because I think a lot of people that went to school for sequential art are like, oh, I don't think I want to do that professionally.
This will take
And
away everything I love about this.
it's
Yeah.
and Morgan's an incredible artist. She's also a perfectionist. So between the two of us trying to make this like 8-page thing into like the most perfect 8 pages possible, I think we both went a little crazy. Um, but I did love doing it, and I'm very proud of what we did. And then I did a short for Everything Is Going Wrong, which was Mark Bouchard's book
Mm-hmm.
about punk rock and mental health. Um, and they were both situations where Nadia invited me to write something, and Mark asked if I would be interested in contributing to Everything's Going Wrong. And both were great experiences. I loved doing it. Um, I think I've always got a little bit of like an inkling of an idea somewhere in there. Like I a couple of years ago, my dear friend David Boer and I were talking about co-writing a book, because I was like, I would love to write this idea I have, but I know myself. If I do this by myself, I will not get it done because I am such a perfectionist. But I don't think it's in a good way. I think it's in a like, if I'm a perfectionist about it, it can't fail, because it's like if it never gets done, nobody can hate it. Um, but David was super supportive, and it never really came together, in part because David blew up. Like he's, I don't even know how many awards he's been raking in or nominated for, and he's a busy guy, and at the time he was still a lawyer, so it was like he was a busy guy, I was working at Boom at the time, and so it just never really lined up. And now I have a couple things that are always kind of like simmering away, but um, maybe I'll come back to them. I would love to. It's mostly just, I think the fact that my day job is comics can make it a little bit challenging to want to spend my free time
Yeah.
creating more. Um, which is silly because I read comics in my free time. It's not like I'm ever really off.
But it is different though. It is different. I mean, as someone who has talked to plenty of other creators who are like, when you're making them, it's hard to like want to read them.
Yeah,
But also though, it's when you do read them and you're like, oh yeah, that's right, I love reading these things.
yeah,
It's just that kind of like battery recharge. I
yeah.
get and I understand the idea of like kind of like setting that stuff aside while you're creating things because you don't want like subconscious influence stuff flowing in or whatever, if you're that particular about certain things. But yeah, just you know but I get what you're saying, that when your job is just doing all the comic stuff, it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
now in your free time, and you're like, do I want to write this thing that is going to be hard because I'm because I know the feeling you're talking about,
Yeah.
wanting it to be perfect or whatever. Which I would never say anything I've put out has been perfect, because I'm like, it's done. It's got to be done. It's done. Like I'm
That's
done.
something
It's
that I
done.
struggle
It's
with,
there.
and like
Yeah.
that's something even in like my
Hmm.
professional life, like at work, I will get really hung up on doing something really, really well. And
Hmm.
even like a lot of my day job involves marketing for works that creators have put their heart into. And so I feel a tremendous amount of responsibility to put the same amount of love and care into what I'm doing for it. And that can be a little bit paralyzing, because it's like, well, these people, they spent, especially because I know how hard it is to put to like making comics is hard. Like it's a
Yeah.
labor of love. Like you have to really want to do it, because oftentimes the reward that you find afterwards is just it's done, and maybe
Hmm.
people like it.
Yeah,
um,
I've told people, like, I've done a lot of jobs in my lifetime. I've done the, when I was a teenager, I did the whole grocery store shtick. I did the, I used to wake up in the middle of the night to help deliver papers on the Sun Times truck.
Nice.
I worked retail, unloading trucks, unloading appliance trucks, and doing all the heavy, gross stuff. Uh, even some construction stuff in the summers. I've done data entry for 8 hours a day. I've done it all,
Yeah.
and it's all hard in different ways.
Yeah.
But nothing breaks my brain more at the end of the day when I've just digging into comics, and either like layouts or just something's not working or
Yeah.
whatever. My brain is never more like I'm just done, and you just feel it in your body than that. And I know for me that's attributed to because that's what I love doing, so therefore I'm
Hmm.
putting more of that into there. But it is incredibly difficult. But also when there's the times where it's like you're just jamming,
Yeah.
everything's flowing, everything's going good, you're like, hey, I actually kind of know what I'm fucking doing, don't I? Whatever,
Yeah.
whatever those 5 minutes every quarter you feel that, it
Yeah.
feels worth it.
Yeah. It's
um
it definitely
so
does. It's that there's definitely moments where you just get that, like you get into like the flow state of just like,
yeah.
oh, this is happening and this is happening and it's all coming together. And it's like my brain finds that, like a team quote with the I love it when a plan comes together with the giant stogie. um,
Yeah.
that's my brain after having a productive day of either working on someone else's book or
Yeah.
working on my own projects or art.
Yeah.
And it is you're right, it is the thing that's like we keep doing it because it is so rewarding when you get
Hmm.
into it, and it does feel like contributing to comics as like a not even as an industry, but as like an art. Like, because I prefer to
Hmm.
think of things in terms of like there's the commerce part and then there's the art, and
Yeah.
they have to intersect because we live in a capitalist society and we have to all make enough
it,
money to
it is it is it
function.
is it is commercial art. You're doing commercial art.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean it can't be good. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
it can't come from your heart and your soul, but it also means you need to do it. You need
Yeah.
to get it done, and you need to be able to, in some shape or way, if your goal is to sell it and get it to people, you have to sell it and get it to people. You have to figure
Yeah.
that out, and that's almost as exhausting as making the things, especially with crowdfunding and things like that. On top of that,
Yeah.
and someone in your position to where you're like constantly going through that cycle of like, okay, next book, let's
Yeah.
start from scratch, let's get this train rolling. Like it can't, that kind of like drive can't be like made without just the most pure and like intense passion for the medium. Because while I'm sure there's aspects of the job they're like, yeah, this is great, this is fun, I like doing this, it's also a grind. and and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everyone knows, the grind will get us all in the end.
Yeah.
So having that spark within to just kind of restart everything after you hopefully get a break or recharge or whatever it may be,
Yeah.
is what keeps us going. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's making comics is it's really tough. I will never not say that. And even when if a comic, you know granted, we all have our opinions about comics, certain people's comics or things like that,
Yeah.
but like I will never not acknowledge the fact that even if it's a comic that I just did not like any aspect of it, I will never not acknowledge like that I'm sure this person like busted their ass to make this.
Yeah.
Because even like making a comic poorly, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
You know, because
Yeah.
there's just so many aspects to it. And as someone who has made comics poorly, it's no easier now than it was doing my first 6-page anthology story than it is doing a 22-page, 24-page comic. And I'm thankful that I have my wife who will actually read these things when they're done and I get them in, and she's like, she'll point out like, oh no, you this looks really good, like,
Yeah.
I've noticed how you've gotten you're she's like, I see you working on how to do this better, and it looks better here,
Yeah.
and like, so, and of course I'm like, yeah, I guess, whatever, but in my head I'm like, that it's what I need to hear.
Yeah. Well,
Because
we're
we get in
always
our
our
own
own
heads.
worst critics. And it's like
Yeah.
when you have somebody who, that's like, back when I first wrote the very first anthology piece I wrote, I had a really good friend who has since left comics, who I really respect as a writer and a creator. And when I finished it, I was like, I finished my first proper script, and he was
Hmm.
very enthusiastic about, like, you should send it to me, I really want to check it out. And I was like, it's not good, I don't like it, I need to gut the whole thing, I need to start over. And he was like, no, send it to me as it is. And just having him read it and say like, hey, I know all you see are the things you don't like, but I can tell you, as somebody who's written comics for a decade, your pacing is really good, especially considering this is your first comic. Like,
Yeah.
you have a sense of these things. And like having those compliments from somebody who you know just sees the product and like what you've done. And
Yeah.
especially when they see the growth, like having your wife be able to say like, oh, hey, I see that you've improved in like this aspect of
Yeah.
like framing a panel, like you're,
uh,
this is really cool, I can see the growth. Like that's really affirming, because so much of comics is done in like not exactly a vacuum, but kind of a vacuum. Like a lot of
well, it
times, you know.
it gets fairly solitary in terms of just
Hmm.
like, I know there's lots of people who, I don't know how prevalent this is now, but I've remember lots of other friends or other people, they would have like their hangouts during the day on Zoom or
Yeah.
whatever, and at least they have that kind of thing. But even then, that's still not the same as like having someone next to you, immediate feedback kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's yeah, it's tough. And there was there's an anecdote. I don't know the source of this. I'm sorry to the person who said this, but it is incredibly true, and that is, um, the person looking at your art doesn't know what it's supposed to look like.
It's
you
true.
know, it's a paraphrase of what it was, but it's like, so like, yeah, again, everything you see wrong in your script or you feel is wrong in script, no one knows what you were going for. So they're just
Yeah.
experiencing the thing cold, and if they're like, this is good, I like this, and you can't do anything but like kind of have to accept that, which sounds like like this begrudging like compliment. Like, fine, I guess I know what I'm doing a
Yeah.
little bit, you know.
Maybe I did okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you're a student of the medium whether you're making them or not,
Hmm.
and having the fundamentals, like you said, like pacing and stuff like that, that is super key. And that whenever I'm in a position to where someone actually, like a younger person, actually wants me to look at their stuff or whatever, like I don't feel qualified enough to like tell them what they're not doing wrong, or
Hmm.
whatever. I like to tell them what they're doing right, when I like
Yeah.
to emphasize like just the fundamentals of things, like learn how to tell a story, like tell the story good, and just keep drawing them,
Yeah.
and things like that, because that's what's going to carry you so much faster, because there's so many amazing artists who I love their work, but sometimes their storytelling is like, okay, like I like all the images you have on here,
Hmm.
I'm not digging like the flow of it, but it's still really great to look at, and I wish I could
Yeah.
draw like that. But but yeah, this that aspect of it, and that's fine, because we're all working on things. We're never, I don't think any artist ever has ever said, I'm done growing
Yeah.
and changing. You know, unless you're like, unless you're like, I'm not gonna, no, I'm not gonna say. Anyway,
No, I
this
get
is
you
a
though.
happy. It wasn't a dig. It was more of a joke. And I'm sure the person would give less than two shits about anything I have to say. So, um, but yeah, you're constantly growing, you're constantly pushing, and all that. So I hope you get a chance to like to write some more stuff and kind of scratch that itch a bit more, because it's just it's just the best thing when you have the thing, and you've got to
Yeah,
experience that a couple times now, and I'm sure that was like, oh my god, this looks like an actual comic. I'm in an
yeah,
actual comic,
yeah.
and
It was
it
so
seems like
funny.
such a small thing, but I still get that experience when I get
Yeah,
my Kickstarter copies in, or I got the trade from Spend the Night in a few weeks ago. I do with Jackie Kong and all that. And I'm like, I made a comic that has like a trade now.
yeah,
I have like two trades under my belt, and three soon with Evie, and like it's just like, wow, I've done some stuff.
yeah.
Maybe I'm not that terrible if I'm having enough support to be able to do all this.
I
you
mean,
know
I would argue you're not terrible in any way. So, but
well,
I get it. It's,
anyone
you
can say
know,
that to me, and I'll still I'll figure something out to
yeah,
say it's terrible. But you know again, as someone who's making them and doing all that, people like you who are just like, comics fucking rule. Here's some awesome comics. Here's some awesome comics. Here's some awesome comics. That's so important to people like me, who like, just if we're not feeling it that day or whatever, but then having someone just come along and say, here's some great comics, or just having that enthusiasm, or pushing a book that I probably never would have picked up on my own, and
yeah,
saying, hey, you want to read this? And I read it, I'm like, this is amazing. And even though it's not a book I would think I would make ever, it's a book that I know will influence me somewhere
yeah,
down the line, or at least just like feed that love of comics and all that.
yeah.
So
And I mean, I think
uh,
that's a good thing as an artist to always be like taking in external, like, inspiration can come from anywhere. Like you can learn
yeah.
something about like visual storytelling from anything. Like we were talking about Dogman earlier,
Hmm.
before you started recording, where it's like there's like Dogman is such advanced visual storytelling for such a
Hmm.
simple art style. And that's
Yeah.
something that I think, it's good artists look at that and they say, what can I learn from this?
Hmm.
And, and then, the alternative to that is the people who look at it and they're like, well, what even is this? This isn't good. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, actually it is.
Looks like
It's
a kid
very
drew
good.
it. Like that's kind of the point, but
Hmm.
also like, if like having like read some of these things, I'm like, there's some genuinely like, of course, obviously very clever humor in there, and also some
Yeah.
very just kid humor, which um I don't know if people experience this, but like as an adult, you're kind of like, yeah, farts aren't funny anymore, whatever. But then you have kids, and then farts are funny all over
Yeah.
again, and
Parts are still
stuff like Dogman,
hilarious.
yeah, or Mayor Good Boy from Dave Scheid and
Yeah.
Miranda Harmon,
Yeah.
or just tons of other stuff that are just amazing for kids. But like, even though Dogman has that visual look of whatever, it's there's a lot of great things in there,
Yeah.
that I'm glad the kids read. You know, uh, some language I have to talk to them about, but
Yeah.
not bad,
There's
but
the
just like,
that's an at home word. We don't say that at school.
just don't
Like,
say that to anybody. I know you're
yeah.
just joking around, but
Yeah.
someone might
Yeah.
get some feelings
There's
hurt. But that's the responsibilities of a parent, not
yeah.
Dave Pilkey.
Yeah.
You make your
There's
funny bits, sir. We'll handle that.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
no, yeah, just having just appreciating everything, uh, and the fact that impact those books have is like, you can't ignore that. Like, just the immense success of someone like Raina Telgemeier. Like,
Yeah.
how do you, like, you just can't ignore that.
Hmm.
Like, you have to like stop and say, the kids reading this are loving comics. Like,
Yeah.
how do we grow from there? How do we do that?
Yeah.
How do we bring them into the fold? And I think that's the, you know, the hard-headed comic fans biggest flaw is like, instead of saying like, oh, you like this thing that's kind of like something I love,
Yeah.
it's not exactly what I love though, so it's trash. As
Yeah.
opposed to like, oh, you really like that?
Yeah.
You know what? There's this other comic that you might like. You know, you know, this is a very old reference take at this point to bring up, but I feel like the genre backlash against Twilight
Yeah.
was such a missed opportunity from people
Mm-hmm.
because, um, you know, as I've actually read those books. Okay, not great, but the stuff in there, I'm like, so you're telling me that we had millions of young people
Mm-hmm.
enthralled with a story about vampires who have different fucking superpowers,
Yeah.
and we're like, you're not allowed in our genre. Like,
Yeah.
motherfucker, that's X-Men, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you could have
Yeah.
just like done it. Like, like you could have just like opened your arms and said like, hey, you
Yeah.
love Twilight? Cool. Look,
Yeah.
we got some other cool like drama with superpowers happening. Like, check this out. But
Mm-hmm.
no, instead, you know, Marvel makes Jubilee a vampire and does nothing with it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, that's kind of like the challenge that we face as an industry all the time
yeah.
is like, you look at something like right now, A Court of Thorns and Roses is like huge. And that's something that as an industry, we look at and we're like, okay, so this book is selling millions of copies and it's about fairies and it's smutty and like, how do we get this audience to read comics? Because comics also has fairies and can be smutty. It also has this level of like fairy like fantasy storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
What is the bridge? And that's something that like the industry thinks about constantly. And I think one of the shortcomings that happens a lot, especially the higher up you go in terms of like direct market, specifically like direct market like attitude toward that, is like there's this, well, we don't do that. And it is that like, okay, well, cool, but these are people that want the stories that we're telling. They just don't know that they want them. And
Mm-hmm.
as like on the marketing side, that's one of the things that I am constantly trying to do is position books so that a wider audience reads them. And when you look at something like Dogman, where it's like, cool, what is the next thing that Dogman kid wants to read? Like,
Yeah.
what do we get them to read? And Mayor Good Boy's a really good one. It's like and we have to keep evolving with what these kids actually want. Not just saying like, well, kids aren't reading comics anymore. It's like, no, they are. They're just not necessarily reading floppies anymore. And
Yeah.
then it's not even to say that they aren't reading floppies. It's like, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy because a lot of publishers stopped making books for kids in floppy. And they're like, well, it's because kids weren't buying them. It's like, you have to measure your expectations, first of all. But secondly, it's like, kids can't access them the way they used to when they used to be in
Mm-hmm.
grocery stores and things when like when I was little and I would be like, I want Archie digests. I didn't care about
Yeah.
Archie, but I was like, I can get comics at the grocery store.
Yeah.
When my mom's
Yeah.
buying dinner, I can just be like, it's $2 and it's 200 pages, mom, come on. um,
Exactly.
and it's part of the modern um, industry is looking at things like, how do we appeal to those kids knowing the limitations that we have, without, instead of just being like, well, it can't work like it used to. It's like, well, we know it can't work like it used to. Like, it's short-sighted to
Nothing
think
works
like,
like it used to.
yeah, everything's always changing. And there's this certain type of very old school personality that's stuck in that mindset of like, well, kids stopped reading comics. And it's like, well, I don't know how to tell you, they've never
They
stopped.
didn't.
Um,
Yeah.
it is a it is definitely a challenge that we are constantly trying to address. And it's also like limitations of the market on the marketing side is oftentimes we have very small teams. Like we
Hmm.
might have 20 editors and there'll be 3 marketers for all of those books. And we all have different things that we do and different areas that we can target. And a lot of the time it's like some of the best books that, like when I was at Boom, before I was in marketing, and when I was there, I was in sales. Um, there were books that were absolutely incredible. Like Chris Wildgoose did a book at Boom called Alienated with Cy Spurrier, and that book just, it could not find its audience, but it was such a good book. And we have that happen a lot where it's like a book will be absolutely incredible, but the market is so full of so many great books that it's like,
Yeah.
okay, how am I going to get this in front of people that'll be excited about it, that don't just want, the next Power Rangers book or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
and it's a big challenge, but it is also exciting, because there are so many amazing stories. So I'm constantly just telling people to go to their LCS and ask the people there, like, what are you reading?
Hmm.
And if they're like, oh, well, I'm reading X-Men, blah, blah, blah. It's like, all right, cool. That's great. What else are you reading? Because everybody in a comic shop has their one weird book that they're like, nobody asks me about this, but here's
Yeah.
this one. Like, I know Patrick and Dal, like, they'll get real hung up on a book and be like, nobody's buying this
Yeah.
book. Buy this book. Like, for a
Yeah.
while for
Yeah.
Patrick, it was Ribbon Queen, and he just wanted everyone to read Ribbon Queen. It made me read Ribbon Queen.
I mean, I bring up Challengers comics a lot because they really brought me back into comics. Their existence is a cornerstone into where I am right now with everything. And yeah, they to this day remain passionate about comics and about certain things. And I know not every LCS owner is going to
Yeah.
be that willing to, like, be like, I'm going to, here's this book that's different that I want people to take it. Cause, and I get it too,
Yeah.
because you got to pay bills.
Yeah.
Um, but I think there's enough LCSs who have local comic shops who have owners, managers, workers there who are nuts about a book you've never heard of that they would love to tell you about.
Mm-hmm.
And that is definitely something that is a an art.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also something that I also understand is difficult for people because not everyone gets to a comic shop to get their
Yeah.
comics. I wish I could go to Challengers every week and just talk to the guys and everyone else who works there and be like, what's good,
Yeah.
tell me something, but this unfortunately not the way it is for myself or for everybody. But if you have the opportunity, yeah,
Yeah.
you got to go do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can listen to the Contest of Challengers podcast by Patrick and Dal, where they not only give some harsh realities about the retail comics business, but also talk about really cool books sometimes
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I certainly write down and then forget to look at because I'm terrible. But you're not terrible, so you can probably go do that.
I
But yeah,
remember about 30% of what they recommend. And
yeah.
oftentimes I will, something I do, and I find this to be very helpful for me, is with Challengers and with a couple other shops that I like that are, like, my mom lives in Pittsburgh and there are a couple shops there I really like. I'll order online from them
Hmm.
periodically and just look at like what they've recommended on the site. Like Challengers has a really cool thing where each member of the staff has a couple titles in a section
Yeah.
that's like, these are the titles that Dal's recommending, these are the titles that MJ's recommending. And I find it opens me up to things that maybe I wouldn't have thought I wanted. Like I bought
Hmm.
I think it was Marauders Volume 1 because MJ was so passionate about it. And I was like,
Yeah.
all right, I don't tend to read a lot of X books. I'm very selective. And then I loved it. And so it was like, all right, well, and so I really recommend that for people. And it's, so often retailers have such a perspective where they're able to be excited about a book that even if they know it's not going to be their number one seller, they're just like, this reminds me what I love about comics, and like this is telling a story in an interesting way. Like we have a book at IDW called Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, which is no longer a small book. It's quite
Mhm.
successful. But when it launched, it was very much like, this is a book about a murder bear. Um, it's like Dexter meets Richard Scarry, and with that pitch, it could have gone either way because it is such a weird book.
Yeah.
And like Patrick Horvath is an incredible storyteller. The art is amazing, but it was definitely something where we were all a little bit like, either people are going to love this or they're going to be like, what is happening here?
Those are the
And
best comics.
exactly. It's like, and I feel like that's where you get the fun experiments, is when somebody is willing to say, like, you know what, this is a book that I want to see exist in the world. So I'm just going to make it.
Yeah. There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, now that we've saved the industry and tell everyone how
Yeah.
they can help save the industry as well. Um,
I've got
uh,
solutions. I come to you with solutions.
and if all else fails, just go hit up Holly online, and I'm sure she'll have any number of excellent titles to recommend to everybody. So Holly, it's been fantastic having you on the show.
Yeah. Thank you so much for
Definitely,
having me.
definitely have you back on again. I keep saying this on the show in hopes that I'll actually do it, but I want to do some more shows where it's like get a few people in, have a whole big old discussion and not be
Yeah.
and being more of a chat, mainly because I'm lazy and I can just sit back, let everyone else do the work, and I can just chime in with like, yeah, okay, and then just let everyone else
You can
create the
moderate.
content for
It's
me.
like
Yeah.
a panel.
Yeah, well, I
Do
got to
your
learn how to
own. Yeah.
moderate a bit because I'm going to try to do a panel at
There you go.
C2E2 next year,
Yeah.
and I really want to do a comics and metal panel at C2E2. I'm dead set on doing it. I think I can get it. I have enough people. I think
Yeah.
I can have on the panel, just in Chicago alone.
Yeah.
I'm sure I can get enough
Absolutely.
people. But yeah, that's a good that's a good way to put it. I got to practice my moderating chops.
Hmm.
But yeah, once again, Holly, it's been a blast having you on. Now's the time to let everybody know where they can find you online.
So you can find me at basically all of the social media places under the handle Chaoticute, which is ChaoTicute. And you can see my name in comics everywhere.
That is not a joke. You are the comics professional. But first and foremost,
Also,
go check out Hanami.
everyone buy Hanami.
Fantastic book.
It's
Uh,
beautiful. It's my baby. It's Julia's baby, but I, I made it an English
you were
language baby.
you helped birth it into the United States.
Hmm. Hmm.
So peons like me can read it with my English and not my Spanish. But yeah, everyone go check that out. Holly, once again, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.